I got the kind of midnight call that cracks your soul open. One minute I was in my tiny San Diego apartment half asleep, and the next I was gripping my steering wheel racing through aftershocks on a broken highway. 200 miles of darkness, sirens, and falling rock because someone found my mother barefoot and shaking outside a gas station in the Mojave Desert. She didn't slip. She didn't wander. My brother and his wife beat her, dragged her out, and left her there like trash. I wish I could tell you that was the worst part. But trust me, it wasn't. And by the time I reached her, I knew one thing for sure: they were going to regret it. Tenfold. My name is Aster Vega, and this is the story I never thought I'd have the strength to say out loud. Before I share my story, I want to know you are here with me. Just say, listening in the comments, or let me know where you are. I love hearing how far my story reach. Sometimes even the smallest connection can make a story feel heard. Thank you. And now, here's my story. And if my voice matters to you, if stories like mine deserve to be heard, please consider subscribing. It costs nothing, but it keeps this place safe for people like me who finally dare to speak. I'm Aster, and this is everything I lived through. An hour before that call shattered everything. My life was small and contained inside a one-bedroom in North Park, San Diego. My name is Aster Vega. I'm 28, and on paper, I'm a junior attorney who advocates for vulnerable seniors. In reality, it means I spend my nights hunched over a wobbly dining table that pretends to be a desk surrounded by stacks of case files and cold takeout containers, trying to prove that lonely old people aren't crazy when they say their own families are hurting them. That night was no different. My laptop glowed in front of me, cursor blinking in the middle of a motion I'd been rewriting for the third time. The TV in the corner was on mute, playing a late-night news loop. I only half looked at it until a bright red banner caught my eye. Series of small quakes near Ridgecrest, California. Ridgecrest. Home. The word was a punch I pretended I didn't feel. I grabbed the remote and turned the screen off before they finished the sentence. Whatever was shaking up there had nothing to do with me anymore. My life now was hearings, deadlines, and just enough sleep to function. I kept my circle tiny coworkers. I grabbed coffee with a neighbor I nodded to in the hallway, a barista who knew my order. No one who knew the name Vega meant anything other than the star. I built that distance on purpose. I hadn't talked to my mother in years. I hadn't seen my brother in longer. Whenever my mind tried to drift back to that house, to that town, I yanked it forward like a bad dog on a leash. I flipped another file open, a black and white photo clipped to the front. An elderly woman, deep bruises along her jaw, eyes empty in that way I recognized too well. Her son claimed she fell. She claimed she deserved it. My chest tightened, a familiar stab of anger and something else I refused to name. For a second, uninvited, my mother's face took the old woman's place. I blinked hard, shut the file. Doesn't matter, I muttered to myself. You left. You're out. I had practiced living like that, like an orphan with a living mother. It was easier to pretend she was gone than accept the truth she'd simply chosen someone else. Chosen him. Even thinking about him made my stomach knot, so I didn't. A little before midnight, the apartment gave a small shudder. My water glass rattled across a stack of briefs, and the overhead light swayed just enough to make the shadows move. My body reacted before my brain did. I dropped under the table, hand braced on the floor, counting breaths until the vibration eased. Muscle memory from too many earthquake drills as a kid. When everything stilled, I crawled back up and laughed once under my breath. You're in San Diego, Aster, not on a fault line anymore. I told myself, even though I knew that wasn't true. A second later, my phone screamed, that shrill emergency tone screen lighting up with a push alert: earthquake near Ridgecrest, moderate magnitude. Aftershocks expected. Ridgecrest again. I opened the map app, watched the little red circle bloom over the desert town I used to call home. For a heartbeat, I hovered over it, zooming in on streets I knew by heart, then slammed the app shut like I'd touched something hot. Not my problem. Not anymore. That's when my phone started ringing. Unknown number. I let it go. It rang again. And again. I turned it face down, convincing myself it was a client with a crisis that could wait until morning, or spam, or anything other than what my gut whispered it might be. On the third missed call, my chest felt tight. By the fourth, the ceiling light gave another tiny sway from a distant aftershock, and my hand moved on its own. I picked up. Hello. My voice sounded rough, like it had traveled farther than the call. Ms. Vega. A male voice, steady official. This is Officer Lang with Ridgecrest Police Department. Are you related to Marisol Vega? The world narrowed to the thin rectangle of my phone. My heart dropped once, clean and hard, then kept pounding in my throat. My fingers went cold around the case. She's my mother, I heard myself say, even though part of me wanted to add, unfortunately. He chose his words like they were brittle. We've located a woman matching her ID and physical description outside a gas station near Mojave. She was found sitting on the ground, disoriented, no coat, no shoes, just house slippers. Some visible bruising. She refused medical transport, but she did insist we call someone named Astor. Said you'd know what to do. For a second, I forgot how to breathe. My mother hadn't said my name to me in years. When I left at 21, she let me go with a shrug and a warning, and that was it. Holidays, birthdays, promotions, she missed them all. The idea of her in a parking lot under cold fluorescent lights, too proud to climb into an ambulance but still clinging to my name, it did something awful to me. I sank into the chair, my knees suddenly unreliable. Is she hurt? I managed. Nothing life-threatening as far as we can tell, he said. But it's below freezing out here and aftershocks are rolling through. She's vulnerable. She won't let us take her in, keeps saying, my daughter will come. She'll handle it. We're limited in what we can do without consent. The thought flashed through me, sharp and mean. I could say no. I could tell him she'd picked her favorite child years ago and it wasn't me. But the words wouldn't move past my teeth. Instead, I heard myself asking where exactly she was and how far from San Diego. Sun Fuel off Highway 58 near Mojave, from San Diego. He paused, doing the math. Little over 200 miles. Roads are rough in places but open. 200 miles. At night. Through an active earthquake zone. He might as well have said back through everything you ran from. I stared at the dead TV screen in front of me and saw my reflection, dark hair in a messy bun sweatshirt streaked with highlighter ink, eyes already haunted. I'll come, I said quietly. I hung up before I could talk myself out of it. Then I was moving, grabbing my thickest coat from the hook by the door, the beat-up first aid kit I kept under the sink, my keys. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't change clothes. I just shoved my feet into sneakers and headed for the elevator. In the mirrored walls of the lobby, I caught another glimpse of myself and almost laughed. What the hell are you doing? I whispered. There was no answer, just the ding of the doors opening to the underground garage and the faint, unsettling tremor rolling through the concrete as another far-off aftershock brushed the city. I slid into my car, turned the key. As the engine rumbled to life and the red taillights of the exit ramp glowed ahead of me, San Diego sat behind like a safe, quiet planet I was willingly leaving. Out there in the dark past the freeways and into the desert were two things I swore I'd never go back to Ridgecrest and my family. The freeway out of San Diego at night always feels a little unreal, like you're driving through a screensaver, just blackness and the occasional streak of headlights. That night it felt worse, like the whole state was breathing shallow. I merged onto I-15, the lanes almost empty, except for a few semis pulled over on the shoulder hazard lights, blinking like silent alarms. The radio was on from earlier, a late-night host halfway through a joke, but it cut to a breaking news voice. Aftershocks continue to ripple through Ridgecrest and surrounding communities tonight. My hand shot out and killed the sound. I didn't need a play-by-play of the ground I was about to drive into. Outside my windshield, the world was dark desert and distant red taillights. Inside the car, it was just the hum of the engine and the roar in my head. Every so often, the road shivered beneath the tires, just enough to make the lines blur. A bridge overpass trembled lightly as I crossed it, causing the guardrails to rattle. A freeway sign up ahead hung crooked, one bolt shaken loose. The irony wasn't lost on me. The whole region was literally cracking open, and somehow, the only thing that really terrified me was a woman in slippers sitting by a gas station saying my name. With nothing else to distract me, my brain did the one thing I didn't want it to do. It went backward. I saw myself at 21 standing in our old living room in Ridgecrest, fingers creased around a crisp job offer letter from a San Diego firm. I had thought stupidly that my mother might be proud. "They want to hire me," I'd said, voice shaking. "In the city. Full-time benefits, everything." She barely looked up from the TV. "Then go," she'd answered. "There's nothing here worth holding you back. Just don't come running back when it's hard." Derek had been leaning in the doorway behind her, arms folded, smirk carved into his face. "Guess the trash takes itself out sometimes," he'd muttered, just loud enough for me to hear. No one corrected him. No one told him to shut up. I had walked out the front door with my one suitcase and a box of books, and no one followed. The only sound behind me was the click of the lock. For a while, I'd tried to keep calling. Little check-ins from my new life. "Hey Mom, I passed the bar. Hey Mom, I got my first real case," but the responses were always late or clipped, if they came at all. Eventually, the calls stopped. That was the thing about distance. Once you started stacking miles, it got easier to stack silence. Another tiny tremor rippled under the tires, jarring me back into the present. My palms were slick on the wheel. Up ahead, the glow of a rest stop sign appeared, promising gas bathrooms and vending machines. My fuel gauge hovered at half, but my nerves were running on empty. I took the exit. The rest stop was almost deserted. One pickup truck parked under a flickering light, a couple huddled inside, scrolling their phones, probably checking Quake maps. Inside the bathroom, a crack snaked down one tile wall hairline, but visible like a vein. I stared at it longer than made sense. I'd spent years pretending the fault lines in my family didn't exist, or that I could outrun them. But some fractures don't stay underground forever. Under the buzzing fluorescent light, I caught my reflection in the mirror over the sink. Dark circles under my eyes, jaw clenched, shoulders tight. "Why are you really going?" I asked the girl in the glass. "Because it's the right thing to do? Because you feel guilty? Or because some part of you still wants her to choose you just once?" The thought made my throat burn. I shut off the faucet, dried my hands, and walked back out into the cold air. As I filled my tank, my phone buzzed in my pocket. The screen lit up with the same number from earlier. I answered on the first ring. "Aster." "It's Officer Lang again," he said. His voice sounded more tired now. "I wanted to update you before you get too much farther." My stomach tightened. "Did something happen? Your mother's stable?" "She's still refusing transport, but we've convinced her to stay put inside the cruiser to stay warm. That's not why I called." He hesitated. "When my partner first made contact, she was more clear than she is now. She told him, and I'm quoting, 'Derek hit me. Haley pushed me out the door.'" The gas nozzle clicked in my hand, startling me. My brother's name said so plainly in a sentence I'd heard versions of my whole life. And now I asked. Now she keeps insisting she tripped. That she's clumsy. That old women fall all the time. I could hear the skepticism in his voice. "I've been doing this a long time," he added quietly. "There's a pattern when victims recant. I can't tell you for sure what happened, but I can tell you she was adamant about one thing: she wanted you. Not her son. You." I leaned against the car, the cold metal seeping through my sweatshirt. Lang's words echoed something I already knew too well. When I was 13, sitting on a bathroom floor with blood running down my lip, my mother had stood on the other side of the door while Derek laughed behind her. "What did you do to set him off this time?" she'd asked through the wood. I'd choked out, "He pushed me." She'd sighed. "He's under a lot of pressure. You know how your brother is. You can't poke at him like that." In our house, Derek was always the one under pressure. I was always the one overreacting. Truth bent itself around him until it snapped. At 17, I had tried to step between them just once. Derek had been screaming at her about money, about bills, about how she couldn't manage anything. When he shoved her and she stumbled, I'd grabbed my phone thumb over 911. "Stop, or I'm calling," I'd said, voice shaking. He'd laughed in my face. Later, after things calmed, my mother hadn't thanked me. She'd pulled me aside and hissed, "You want to air our dirty laundry to the whole town, he's your brother. You don't call cops on family." That was the night I learned that in our house, appearances outranked safety every time. Back at the rest stop with the pump clicking back into place, and the aftershocks slowly rolling under my feet, I felt the old anger press against my ribs. "Did she say why she wanted me?" I asked Lang. He paused. "She said, 'You're the only one who doesn't believe she's crazy,'" he answered. For what it's worth, she seemed scared, not confused. "I can't prove anything yet. I just thought you should know what you're driving into." "Yeah," I said softly. "Me too." We hung up, and for a moment I just stood there. The desert wind cutting through me, the sky beginning to pale at the edges. I thought of my mother in the back of a patrol car clutching at whatever was left of her dignity. I thought of Derek probably asleep in my childhood home like nothing had changed. And I thought of her using my name not as a weapon, not as an insult, but as a lifeline. Back on the freeway, the signs started to shift. The familiar green rectangles for Barstow, then Kramer Junction, then finally Mojave, next exit. The horizon was turning that washed-out blue that comes right before sunrise, the kind of light that makes everything look softer than it really is. My hands tightened on the wheel. If you go all the way out there, I told myself, you don't get to run halfway back like you did at 21. You see it through whatever it is. I took the Mojave exit. Dust whipped across the road, little swirls of sand skating in my headlights. Ahead in the distance, I could see the glow of a gas station sign flickering against the bruised sky, a tiny square of light in all that empty land. Somewhere under it, my mother was waiting, cold, bruised, and still calling my name. The Sun fuel station sat off the highway like it had been knocked sideways by the night. The sign was hanging slightly crooked, a few neon letters blinking in and out, so that it read more like Su-Fu L than anything real. Yellow police tape fluttered in the breeze, crisscrossing over a couple of fresh cracks in the asphalt that spidered out from the pumps. Inside the glass storefront, I could see a lone cashier restacking toppled chip bags, the fluorescent light behind him buzzing like an insect. Out here, though, it was just cold air and desert wind, grit hitting my face so different from the soft, salty damp of San Diego. I pulled into the lot tires, rolling over fractured concrete, and for a heartbeat I couldn't see her. Then my headlights swept past the side of the building, and there she was. A small figure curled against the wall between a dented metal trash can and a humming ice freezer. My mother, Marisol. She wore an old housecoat I remembered from years ago, once bright blue, now washed out, and stained, hanging awkwardly over a pair of thin pajamas. Her feet were crammed into terry cloth slippers, the back's mashed down skin around her ankles red and swollen. Her hair stuck out in tangled clumps, and her lips were split white with dryness. She looked like someone had erased half of the woman I knew and left only the bones. For a second, my brain tried to argue this couldn't be her, not the same woman who had once told me not to come crawling back. Then she shivered, shoulders jerking, and something in her profile hit me so hard my chest ached. I killed the engine and stepped out. The cold knifed through my sweatshirt. My throat felt tight as I approached. "Mom," I said quietly. The word came out strange, stiff, like a language I hadn't spoken in years. She flinched at the sound, then slowly lifted her head. Her eyes moved over me, unfocused at first, then sharpened with a flicker of recognition and something like panic. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered. "He'll be mad." Her voice was rough as if the cold had sanded it down. I crouched beside her, reaching for her hand. Her skin was icy bruises blooming along her wrist, and the second my fingers closed around hers, she snapped back like she'd been shocked, shoulders curling in. It wasn't just the weather making her shake. "Ms. Vega," I heard behind me. I turned to see a man in uniform, Officer Lang, standing a respectful distance away, arms folded, watching her carefully. His patrol car idled nearby, exhaust drifting in the air. "We found her about an hour ago," he said low enough that she wouldn't have to hear every word. "Truck driver spotted her lying out here after the last big jolt and called it in. She refused the ambulance, kept saying she couldn't go to a hospital, that he would find her there." He glanced at my mother. She mentioned a Derek. Hearing my brother's name out loud in this place made the hair on my arms rise. When he added, "She told my partner your son hit you, and your daughter-in-law pushed you out the door," my mother cut in sharply, eyes flashing. "No," she said louder than anything she'd managed so far. "I walked out. I tripped. I'm old. Old people fall." The words came too fast, like a script she'd memorized. Lang looked at me, then back at her, and I saw the familiar pattern settle between us. Say the truth, then snatch it back. Bleed, then apologize for staining the floor. "Let's get you warm," I said, trying to keep my voice level. I helped her to her feet. She winced and swayed, fingers digging into my arm for balance. I guided her to my car, buckled her in, cranked the heater until my own cheeks prickled from the blast. She stared at her hands in her lap, the knuckles cracked and raw. "My hands don't work anymore," she murmured. "He says I'm useless now." "Who?" I asked, even though I knew. She turned her head, gaze drifting past me to the windshield, to the faint lines in the pavement outside, where the earth had split and been hastily taped off. She didn't answer. At the mention of the hospital, she snapped back to attention, fear sharp in her eyes. "No," she said, fingers clutching at my sleeve. "You can't take me there. That's the first place he'll look. He always knows." The certainty in her voice made my skin crawl. Lang came to the window, handed me a card. "Local hospitals slammed from the quakes anyway," he said. "If you can get her somewhere safe for the night, keep her warm, that might be the best we can do until we sort this out. If you learn anything more, call me. Don't take this all on yourself." I nodded, even though taking things on myself was the only way I knew how to survive. 15 minutes later, we were checking into a roadside motel off the highway, the kind with a faded sign and a parking lot full of potholes. A fresh crack ran down one stucco wall patched with hurried plaster. Inside our room, everything smelled faintly of bleach and old cigarettes. 2 double beds, thin floral bedspreads, a humming heater under the window curtains that let in more neon than they blocked. Somehow, it still felt quieter than the phone call, and the what-ifs roaring in my head. I sat my mother on the edge of the nearest bed, grabbed the beat-up first aid kit from my bag, and started cataloging the damage. Finger-shaped bruises on her wrists and upper arms. A dark, angry knot at her temple that looked exactly like someone hitting a countertop. Scratches along her forearm like she'd grabbed at something on her way down. When I brushed the inside of her wrist, she jerked away. "Don't pull me," she blurted, breath hitching. "I signed it all right. I signed it, just stop." I froze. Signed what I asked, gently. Her eyes slid closed, her chest rising and falling too fast. "Don't let him take everything," she whispered. "Not the house. Not the money. Not my mind." The last word broke on her tongue. Then she seemed to drift, slipping somewhere between awake and asleep, unreachable. Her words sat between us, heavy. This wasn't just about fists and doors. There were papers involved. Pens, signatures, control. On the nightstand, an old flip phone lay face down, the plastic yellowed with age. I picked it up. 1 bar left on the battery, 1 missed call, 1 new voicemail. Derek's name glared up at me from the minuscule screen. For a second I hesitated. This was her phone, her privacy, but then I looked at the bruises dotting her skin and the cracked skin on her feet and decided we were past that. I put it to my ear and hit play. His voice spilled out calm and flat, like he was making a dinner reservation. "You embarrassed me, Ma. You really want to play it this way? Keep it up and next time I'll make sure nobody finds you. No yelling, no slurs. Just cold intent wrapped in family." My hand went numb around the phone. I was 16 again, locked out in the backyard in January, because I'd talked back hugging my knees for warmth, while Derek smoked on the porch and laughed through the glass. Back then, my mother had cracked the door open just long enough to say, "Why do you always push him like that?" before closing it again. I stared at her now, asleep on a lumpy motel bed, trembling even under the thin blanket, and something inside me shifted. This was not an accident. She hadn't simply wandered into a storm. Someone she trusted had thrown her into it. I stepped out into the hallway, the patterned carpet thin beneath my shoes. A plastic cup on the ice machine vibrated with a small aftershock water quivering inside. I watched it settle and thought about all the times I'd let things settle back home just because rocking the boat meant getting blamed for the waves. Not anymore. "I'm not here just to pick you up off the ground," I told myself under my breath. "I'm here to figure out who shoved you down there." If Derek could talk to her like that on a recording he knew existed, what had he done off the record behind doors in the house I grew up in? I didn't have answers yet, but I knew where I'd have to go to find them. By morning, the motel heater had dried the air to the point my throat felt like sandpaper. My mother was still asleep, mouth slightly open, breathing shallow but steady. The bruises on her face had darkened overnight, blooming fully now that her blood had settled. For a long minute, I just stood by the door watching her, wondering if I was about to undo years of carefully built distance in one drive across town. Going back to Ridgecrest had always been the line I swore I wouldn't cross. Now it felt like the only move left. I texted Officer Lang, fingers flying over the screen, heading to my mom's house to get clothes and check things out. "Will update." The 3 blinking dots appeared, then his reply, "Be careful. If your brother's involved, he won't like you asking questions." The road from the motel into town was worse in daylight. Jagged seams cut through the asphalt, hastily filled with gravel. A Caltrans truck crawled along the shoulder cones and barriers, marking places where the earth had buckled. A few residents stood in their yards, arms folded, staring at cracked sidewalks and tilted fences like they'd woken up in someone else's neighborhood. The sky was a hard, cloudless blue that made everything look too sharp. Dust rose with each passing car, hanging in the air longer than felt normal, as if the town itself was holding its breath. With every mile, my heart thumped a little harder, keeping time with the faint occasional tremors I could feel through the steering wheel. When I turned onto the street I'd biked up and down as a kid, the house appeared exactly where I'd left it, stubborn as ever. Beige siding, dark brown trim, small front porch. It had weathered the quake better than most, no visible cracks, no fallen awning. The cactus in a pot by the front steps was still there too, spines, dusty flesh, shriveled and gray. My mother loved that cactus when she first got it, fussing over the right amount of sun, the right pot. At some point she'd stopped noticing it was dying. Standing there on the curb I realized I'd been exactly the same. I walked up and rang the bell. After a moment the door opened and there stood Haley. Perfect blonde highlights, silky robe cinched tight, manicured hand wrapped around a mug of coffee. She looked me up and down from my wrinkled clothes to the dark rings under my eyes. "I knew you'd show up eventually," she said, taking a slow sip. "No hello. No, how's your mother?" The casual disdain in her tone made my teeth clench. "I'm here to get some of my mom's things," I said, "and to ask what the hell happened last night." She leaned against the doorframe, expression unreadable. "Marisol's been unwell," she said, "wandering off, forgetting things. We do our best, but we can't be glued to her side 24/7. Her voice was soft, almost sympathetic, but underneath it I heard the script again. Old people fall. Old people wander. No one's fault. As she shifted her mug from one hand to the other, I caught a glimpse of a red mark along her wrist, thin and fresh, like someone had grabbed her there. Our eyes met for half a second. She tucked that hand behind her back, smile tightening. My instincts prickled. She stepped aside reluctantly and let me pass. The smell hit me first, pine cleaner and something rich and garlicky from last night's dinner. The hallway was lined on one side with framed photographs, dozens of them. Derek as a toddler covered in frosting. Derek in a football uniform, mud on his knees but grinning wide. Derek in a graduation gown, arm around Haley. Haley in a cocktail dress at some charity event. Their daughter Jade, through the years, missing teeth. Ballet recitals, first day of middle school. A curated museum of their life. I walked slowly, scanning every frame, searching for my own face. There was one family picture I recognized from Easter 2008, all four of us in our Sunday best on the church lawn. Only here the left side of the photo had been trimmed cleanly away. You could see my mother's shoulder angled toward where I used to be, the edge of Derek's arm curved around someone no longer there. Me. It felt like someone had reached inside my chest and removed a piece, leaving the outline behind. I'd spent years acting like I didn't exist to them, and here was proof they'd been practicing pretending long before I left. Erasing me from the wall was just catching up to the erasing they'd done in their heads. "Aunt Astor," a small voice called. I turned to see Jade standing halfway down the stairs, pajamas, rumpled hair sticking up on one side. For the first time since I walked in, something like warmth sparked in me. "Hey, Bug," I said. She came down a few steps, then glanced toward the kitchen as if checking whether she was allowed to move. Her eyes were too serious for 12. She stepped close enough to whisper, "You shouldn't stay long. Dad gets mad really fast now." My throat tightened. "Did you see what happened with Grandma last night?" I asked softly. Her mouth opened, then Haley's voice sliced through from the kitchen, bright and sharp. "Jade upstairs. Now. Let your aunt do what she needs to do." The girl flinched, nodded at me, and retreated every step back up the stairs, leaving a trail of unsaid things. I turned away and headed for the small home office my mother used to keep. The desk drawers that once overflowed with utility bills, bank statements, tax returns empty. The metal file box in the closet where she'd stored the deed to the house and insurance papers gone. It was like someone had taken a vacuum to every corner of her financial life. People with memory problems don't usually decide to neatly erase their paper trail. People who want power do. Something nagged at me, a half memory of my mother carefully labeling boxes in the basement years ago. I went down the narrow stairs, the air cooler and damp. The quake had shaken some things off shelves, leaving Christmas decorations and old board games scattered. In the far corner, under a sagging shelf, sat a cardboard box with black marker scrawled across the top, Astor 2005-2011. My stomach dropped. I dragged it into the light and opened it. Inside were pieces of my life I hadn't known were missing. A photo of me at 16 folded so that my face was creased right down the middle. A college acceptance letter to a state school I never attended, ripped neatly in half and then taped back together. A birthday card with no signature, just "Proud of you" in handwriting I recognized as my mother's, the ink smudged like maybe she'd thought twice about it. A small spiral notebook I used to write in several pages, torn clean out. It was like finding an evidence box for a crime I hadn't realized they'd committed, the slow, quiet removal of me from their story. I took photos of everything with my phone, hands shaking a little. Then I climbed back up into the sunlight out of the basement and its ghosts. In the driveway, I thumbed through the images and hit call on Lang's number. When he answered, I said, "I think my brother made her sign the house over. All her financial documents are gone. And I just found a law office receipt in the trash earlier for a property transfer." I sent him the pictures. On the other end, there was a brief pause as he opened them. "If you're right," he said finally, his tone heavier than before. This is bigger than a fall in a parking lot. You need to be ready for a fight, Ms. Vega. I ended the call and looked back at the house, at the crooked cactus on the porch, and the wall of photos I was no longer in. Walking away felt like climbing out of a pit I hadn't known I'd fallen into. But as I got into my car, one thought settled in my chest with surprising clarity: I was coming back. And next time, I wouldn't be the one caught off guard. The house I grew up in backed up to another small, sunburnt lot, and behind that stood a place I'd always thought of as a kind of emergency exit. Mrs. Henderson's house looked the same as it had when I was a kid. Single-story, pale paint, a line of chimes tinkling weakly on the porch. When Derek slammed doors too hard, or Mom cried in the kitchen, that was where I'd stare, telling myself there was at least one adult nearby who could see what was happening. I cut through the side street and walked up her short driveway. My knock sounded too loud in the quiet morning. For a moment I thought she might not answer. Then the deadbolt slid back and the door edged open. She peered out, squinting, and then her eyes widened. "Aster," she breathed. "Lord have mercy. You came back." She opened the door wider and ushered me in with a fluttering motion of her hand. Up close, she looked smaller than I remembered: shoulders, hunched gray hair pulled back in a loose bun. Her hand shook as she pushed the door closed behind me. In the living room, the coffee table was cluttered with pill bottles and a glass of water. A small radio on the counter murmured updates about aftershocks and damaged roads. She poured tea into 2 mismatched cups, but her hand trembled so much that half of it sloshed into the saucer. "You don't have to," I started, but she waved me off and sat down opposite me. Her eyes kept flicking toward the back window, the one that faced our yard. It hit me. Then she wasn't just old, she was afraid. "I'm just going to ask you straight," I said. "Did you see anything the night my mom disappeared?" At first, she hedged. "That house of yours has always been loud," she said. "Voices raised, doors banging. Folks argue that's family." It was the same kind of shrug I'd heard my whole life. But I told her about finding my mother at the gas station. I told her about the bruises, about the message Derek left promising that next time no one would find her. I watched the way her mouth tightened with each word. Finally, she sighed, long and tired. "I suppose you've earned the truth," she said. "And your mama. She deserves someone in her corner. She told me it started around 9, maybe a little after." She had just turned off her TV when she heard shouting through the thin walls. Derek's voice, sharp and mean, like he used to sound when we were kids, and he didn't get his way. She went to her back door and looked through the glass. From where she stood, she could see straight into my mother's kitchen. "Your brother was by the counter, arm swinging," she said, moving her own hand in a chopping motion. Your mama stumbled back. She reached for a chair, missed it. Went down hard. That wasn't no simple trip. My chest felt tight. "You're sure?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "I've fallen enough in my life to know the difference between losing your balance and getting knocked," she said. She tried to get up. A bit later, that wife of his, the blonde one, dragged her toward the back door. Left her out on the step like a bag of laundry. It was cold even before the shaking started. She went quiet for a moment, eyes going distant. "When the big quake hit, my lights went out," she said. By the time they flickered back on, she was gone. Yard empty. I asked her why she hadn't called the police that night. Her jaw worked, shame pulling at her face. "I thought about it," she admitted. Phone was in my hand. But it's Derek. Folks here know his temper and they know how he talks. He'd have turned it around, made it sound like I was the crazy one. I'm an old widow. He's the good son taking care of his sick mother. You know how that plays. I did know. That was the worst part. I asked if I could record what she'd just told me. She nodded and repeated it all into my phone voice, shaking but clear. As I was getting up to leave, she stopped me with a hand on my arm. "One more thing," she said. "Before it all went quiet, I heard your mama's voice through my window. Couldn't make it all out, but she said something about the house. papers, crying that he made her sign something. The words landed like a stone in my stomach. He made me sign, I signed. My mother had muttered back at the motel. Don't let him take everything. It all lined up too neatly to ignore. Outside on my way to the street, I passed her trash can. A corner of crumpled white caught my eye, the logo of a law firm I didn't recognize. I pulled it free. It was a receipt, legal services, quitclaim deed and property transfer with Derek's name in the new owner line and my mother's on the grantor line. The date was exactly 2 months ago. My skin went cold. I walked back to our yard this time through the gate that led to the back. The concrete step outside the kitchen door had a fresh chip in it, just where a head might hit if someone fell backward. 4 faint scratches scored the wooden siding at hand height, like someone had clawed at it, trying to stay upright or grab hold of something solid. I took pictures of everything. Inside in the kitchen, I scanned the room like a stranger looking for anything out of place. That's when I saw it, a small baby monitor camera nestled behind a decorative vase on the shelf by the ceiling, its lens pointed directly at the spot where my mother would have stood at the counter. Most people use cameras like that to watch their kids or their front doors. Derek apparently used his to watch his mother. A tiny LED still glowed on the side. I reached up, pulled it down, and popped open the back. A micro SD card sat in its slot, no bigger than my fingernail, and suddenly, the heaviest thing I'd ever held. If it was still recording the night of the quake, it might have captured everything. I slipped the card into my coat pocket and forced myself to walk back through the house like nothing had happened. I eased the back door shut, listening for any movement upstairs. Nothing. Outside, the sky above the desert was a flat, pale gray, a thin layer of dust hanging in the air. Somewhere deep underground, the plates were still shifting, finding their new positions. I had the feeling I was about to do the same for my family. Back at the motel, the room felt different, like it knew I hadn't just gone out for coffee. My mother was still asleep, turned onto her side, one hand curled near her face. Her breathing sounded steadier. I sat on the other bed and held the SD card in my palms, staring at it. It looked like nothing. It felt like a key to a locked room I'd been standing outside of for years. I set my laptop on the rickety table, plugged in a card reader, and slid the chip in. A folder popped up, a list of video files, time-stamped with dates and hours. My pulse jumped when I saw the one from the night of the quake. I clicked it. The footage was grainy, yellow-tinted, a slightly tilted view of my mother's kitchen. She was there at the sink, clutching an envelope, shoulders hunched. Her voice came through tinny but clear enough. Derek, did you take money from my account? He walked into frame, taller than I remembered, broader, but the same controlled posture, the same flat eyes. You don't keep track of anything anymore, Ma, he said. You can't manage bills. I'm helping you. It's my money, she said, her hand shaking with the envelope. You didn't ask. He stepped closer, looming. You're not all there these days. Everybody knows it. I had to take over. Each word was a trigger, firing memories I'd tried to bury. The times he'd told me I was too emotional when I called out his cruelty. The times Mom had parroted his lines back at me. On the screen, my mother said, "I'm calling the bank," and turned like she was going for the phone. In an instant, he was on her, his hand clamping around her wrist. He yanked her so hard she spun her back, catching the edge of the counter. Her head snapped back, struck the corner of the cabinet with a dull thud. She crumpled out of frame. Haley walked in from the hallway a few seconds later, phone in her hand. She glanced down at my mother on the floor, then at Derek. "You need to calm down," she said, as if he'd just raised his voice and kept walking out of view. My mother's hand appeared on the edge of the counter, fingers clawing for purchase. Derek stood over her. "Stop making a scene," he said. "You signed the papers. It's done. Don't make me look bad." My vision blurred at the edges. I watched it again. The second time I focused on Haley's face, the way she stepped over my mother's body like it was a drop towel. The third time I turned the volume up. That's when I heard it, right before the clip cut off to another timestamp. My mother's voice hoarse whispering, Aster, where are you? The guilt hit me hard. While she was lying on that tile floor reaching for something, I'd been in San Diego wrapping myself in case files and pretending I'd outgrown needing a mother. A soft rustle behind me made me close the laptop. My mother was awake, staring at me with red-rimmed eyes. I carried the computer over and sat beside her. Do you remember what happened? I asked. She looked at the dark screen, at her own reflection, then at me. Her hands trembled as if they already knew. When I hit play and the kitchen came into view, she flinched like she'd been struck again. Turn it off, she said, reaching for the lid. Don't let him know you have that. He'll lose everything and he'll blame you. That's kind of the point, I said, my voice rough. You told me not to let him take everything. What did you mean? She stared at her lap. The house, she said, barely audible. The accounts. He said I was forgetful, that I was messing things up. He brought the papers and his friend in a suit. Said if I didn't sign, he'd tell everyone I was crazy. That they'd lock me up, that I'd never see Jade again. Her shoulders shook. I believed him. I signed because I was scared. Because nobody ever took my side before. I swallowed hard. You've had my number for 7 years, I said. You never called. Why, that night she wiped at her nose with the back of her hand. Because I thought I might die out there, she admitted. And I couldn't stand the idea that the last person who touched me was him. You were the only one who ever stood between us. Even when I told you not to. I didn't know what to do with that. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't absolution. It was a small crooked bridge, and for now it had to be enough. I steadied my voice and called Lang. I told him about the neighbor, about the receipt, about the video and the voicemail. I sent everything to his secure email and 3 different cloud folders. You've got a solid case, he said, no hesitation this time. But your brother will come out swinging. Men like that, they don't go down quiet. I'm done being quiet, I said. Before I left, I backed the video up twice more and emailed it to myself under a bland subject line. I printed still frames at a FedEx down the road. Then I drove back to the house I'd just escaped, adrenaline buzzing under my skin. When I walked in without knocking, Derek was at the kitchen table, laptop open, pretending to work. His face flushed immediately. You went through my stuff, he snapped. You stole from my house. In our mother's house, I corrected. And I didn't steal. I recovered evidence. I set my laptop down, turned it toward him, and hit play. Watching your own violence from the outside does something to a person. For a second, his mask cracked. His mouth fell open, eyes widening as he watched himself grab a frail wrist and throw his own mother to the ground. Haley hovered behind him, one hand on the back of his chair. Her complexion went ashy as her recorded self stepped over the body on the floor. You think this means anything, he said, finally forcing a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. You abandoned this family. You're unstable. I've got a doctor's letter saying Mom's been losing it for years. I'm the one who stayed. The one who took care of her. You really think a shaky video is going to trump that? He pulled a folder from a drawer and flicked it open, showing me copies of a medical evaluation, words like cognitive decline and impaired judgment circled. A doctor's signature at the bottom. Another layer of the trap. For a heartbeat, I faltered. Then I looked up at Haley. He might have a doctor willing to sign whatever he wants, I said. But the court's also going to see this footage of you looking right at my mother on the floor and walking away. They're going to hear my neighbor describe you dragging her outside. That's neglect at best. Accessory at worst. Haley's lips parted. She looked from the screen to Derek, then back again. Derek, she whispered. You said it wasn't like this. Shut up, he hissed. She's manipulating you. That's what she does. That's what she's always done. I stood, closing the laptop with a soft click. You already erased me from the photos, I said. From the holidays. From her life. You don't get to decide the record anymore. I do. His composure snapped. He slammed his fist on the table so hard the coffee mug jumped. I will make you disappear from this family again, he shouted. For good this time. I met his rage with something colder. You already did, I said. Now it's my turn. As I walked toward the door, movement on the stairs caught my eye. Jade was crouched on the top step, fingers wrapped around the railing, eyes wide and pleading. Our gazes locked. There was fear there, but also something else, a question. Maybe even a glimmer of hope. In that split second, I understood in a way I hadn't let myself before, that this wasn't just about saving the woman in slippers outside a gas station. It was about making sure the next generation didn't learn that love meant bruises and silence. I gave Jade the smallest nod I could manage without drawing attention. Then I stepped out into the brittle desert air, the door closing behind me like the end of an era. I didn't sleep the night before the hearing. I sat at the motel desk with my laptop and a pile of paper, building a case against my own brother. I clipped screenshots from the video, printed photos of Mom's bruises, typed up Mrs. Henderson's statement, transcribed Derek's voicemail word for word. Every file went into a cloud backup, then another, then a thumb drive I kept in my pocket. Mom sat on the other bed, wrapped in a borrowed sweater, watching me. Her hands were still shaky, but her spine was straighter than I'd seen it in years. It felt less like preparing legal documents and more like bracing for another quake, the kind that rearranges a landscape. Kern County's small courthouse was buzzing when we walked in. Word had gotten out: local businessman under investigation for elder abuse, emergency guardianship hearing, possible fraud. Reporters clustered in the hallway, lenses turning as we passed. Inside the hearing room, the air felt charged. Derek was already there in an expensive suit, jaw tight, hair perfect. Haley sat beside him in a dark dress, eyes rimmed in red, the picture of a supportive wife. Jade hovered at their backs, hunched in a chair, her sneakers not quite touching the floor, eyes swollen like she'd cried all morning. Our petition went first. My attorney played the kitchen footage on a monitor for the judge. You could have heard a pin drop as everyone watched my brother grab our mother's wrist and send her crashing to the tile. The still shots of the bruises followed, then the receipt for the house transfer, with her shaky signature, then a printout of his voicemail. Next time, I'll make sure nobody finds you. I didn't look at him while it played. I watched the judge instead, the way her face stayed neutral, but her eyes sharpened. When it was Derek's turn, he rose slowly, like he was stepping onto a stage. Your Honor, he began, voice smooth. My sister left our family at 21 and never looked back. She's always had issues with anger, with reality. Now she's back, and suddenly there's a camera and accusations and a lot of talk about money. He held up the medical report. My mother has been evaluated. She has significant cognitive decline. She doesn't remember things correctly. Astor is using that to try to take control of her assets. I stood. If my mother is as far gone as he says, I asked, how did she know my exact name and number the night she was left outside that gas station? Why didn't she ask for her devoted son? The room went quiet. People who are truly lost don't remember who scares them. I went on. My mother may be confused sometimes, but she knows fear, and she knows who causes it. I handed up a photocopy of a journal page we'd found folded in the bottom of her dresser, one of the few she hadn't torn out. In shaky Spanish, then English, she'd written, "He calls me useless. He is not the boy I raised." The judge read it, lips pressed together. Then Jade stood up. Her knees were knocking, but she walked to the front of the room when the judge asked if she wanted to speak. I saw my dad push Grandma, she said, voice trembling but clear. She hit her head. He told me if I told anyone, he'd send me away to someplace for bad kids. I don't want to live in that house anymore. Derek exploded. She's lying, he shouted. She's 12, she doesn't know what she saw. He took a step forward before the bailiff put a hand on his arm. Jade burst into tears, but she didn't take it back. I'm not lying, she sobbed. I'm tired of being scared. The judge called for order. When things settled, she spoke slowly and very precisely. She granted me temporary guardianship of my mother, effective immediately. Derek was stripped of all decision-making authority and barred from contacting or approaching Mom for at least 60 days. She ordered a formal investigation into elder abuse and financial coercion, with a recommendation that law enforcement pursue charges if warranted. Haley went pale. Derek tried to argue, but two court officers stepped toward him, and for once, he sat down. Walking out of that building with my mother at my side, I felt like I was stepping into actual daylight after years underground. The cameras outside flashed, reporters shouted questions, but their noise felt far away. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from an unknown number slid onto the screen. The video is only the beginning. Dig deeper. He didn't do all of this alone. My skin prickled. I looked back toward the courthouse steps at the swirl of family attorneys' reporters. Somewhere in that crowd, someone else knew more than they were saying. We didn't go back to Ridgecrest after the hearing. With help from a victims' advocacy group and some emergency funds, I found a small rental house in Lancaster, a low stucco place tucked behind an elementary school, and a strip of wind-beaten shops. Beige walls, 2 bedrooms, a tiny patch of yard out back. It wasn't much, but every lock worked and no one had a key but us. It didn't feel like starting over. It felt like starting correctly for the first time. Mom moved into the smaller bedroom, Jade into the other. Jade had come to us quietly, a suitcase and a stuffed bear in her arms after child services got involved, and Haley, staring at the consequences lined up in front of her, admitted it might be better for now. The plan on paper was temporary placements and evaluations. The plan in my heart was simpler: keep them safe as long as they needed me. The days took on a rhythm. Mom saw a real doctor, one who adjusted her meds and talked to her like she was still in there. She started taking her pills on schedule. The fog in her eyes thinned. The first few weeks she jumped whenever a car door slammed outside her gaze, darting to the window as if expecting Derek's truck. Then slowly, that reflex faded. One afternoon she caught sight of herself in the hallway mirror and didn't flinch. She just smoothed her hair and asked, "Do I look okay? We're meeting your caseworker, aren't we?" It was such an ordinary question that my throat got tight. She began cooking again. Simple things at first: rice, beans, caldo, filling the little house with smells I'd missed more than I'd realized. Some nights while Jade did homework at the table, Mom would ask, "Was your day hard?" and listen like the answer mattered. It wasn't some movie magic transformation. There were still bad dreams, still days where she forgot what we just talked about. But little by little, the fear that had lived in her shoulders seemed to drain away. I took a job with a nonprofit that specialized in elder protection, this time as more than just a legal assistant. In case meetings, I told parts of our story, not names, not details, just enough to let other daughters, other sons know they weren't imagining what was happening in their own kitchens. Every time someone's eyes filled when I said, "You're not crazy. You're not alone," I felt something inside me knit a little tighter. Lang called once to say that Derek had emptied what was left in his personal accounts and vanished. Some people said he'd run to Arizona, others swore they saw him headed east. I didn't chase the rumors. The idea of him somewhere out there still made my stomach clench. But I knew this much: he'd lost the one thing he cared about most: control. Whatever he did next was on him. I was done organizing my life around his shadow. One morning, I found an envelope on the kitchen table. No stamp, no address. Mom's handwriting looped across the front. Inside, on a single sheet of paper, she had written, "You didn't let me fall all the way this time. I know you could have walked away. This time, I believe you." There was no, "I'm sorry" for every year she hadn't. Strangely, I didn't need it. That single line was enough to set down a weight I'd been carrying since I was a kid, shutting a bathroom door against my brother's footsteps. Spring came late to our little backyard, the ground still cracked from drought and winter freezes. One Saturday, Jade and I knelt in the dirt with a bag of daffodil bulbs between us. The soil was dry and stubborn, split by old fissures. "Are you sure anything can grow in this?" she asked, pushing her hair out of her face with a dirty glove. "If we take care of it?" "Yeah," I said. "Even ground that's been broken can hold roots." Mom sat on the back step, a mug of coffee in her hands, watching us. When Jade covered the last bulb and patted the earth, Mom said softly, "Just like us." We sat there for a while, the three of us in a yard that wasn't much to look at yet. The world hadn't magically become safe. Derek was still somewhere on the map. The anonymous message on my phone was still unanswered. There were still court dates ahead, paperwork, therapy appointments, restless nights. But the fault line that had run through my life since childhood had finally been named. I realized then that I hadn't beaten my brother. This wasn't about winning. It was about refusing to keep playing a game rigged in his favor. I had saved my mother from freezing outside a gas station, but I had also dragged the girl I used to be, bloody nose, shaking hands, begging to be believed, onto solid ground. The earthquake that tore through our family had exposed everything we'd been told to hide. We would never be the picture on the wall again. We were something else now. Not unbroken, but rebuilt, standing on cracked earth that for the first time felt like ours.